everyone. I think that we might kick off this evening and commence the recording. So good evening and welcome to the Exclusion Fencing Costs and Benefits webinar with speaker Morgan Gronold, and we have some great case studies from local producers who will walk us through the costs and benefits of exclusion fencing. I'm Tanisha Shields. I'm a Senior Land Services Officer from Western Local Land Services. I'm based in Balranald in southwest New South Wales, and I'll be your host for this evening. Before we get started, I would just like to acknowledge that exclusion fencing is increasingly being used as a tool to increase production areas and protect areas of high conservation from the threats posed by pest species. A myriad of tools and fence designs exist for this purpose, and the impact on native species needs to be considered when assessing exclusion fence designs and when planning a fence's alignment, construction and maintenance. Thank you all for your comments and questions this evening. We will acknowledge all points of view in relation to exclusion fencing. The information that we'll provide this evening is general in nature and will need to be adjusted to each individual situation when choosing to construct an exclusion fence. I'll move on today to the agenda for this evening. So before we get into the presentations, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land which we are meeting on today. For me, that's Wiradjuri country, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. This evening's webinar is being part of a series which is being hosted by the Farm Business Resilience Program, which is an initiative by the Australian Government's Future Drought Fund and the New South Wales Department of Primary Industries, being delivered by the New South Wales Local Land Services. As we mentioned before, or as I mentioned as you were joining the webinar this evening, we will be interacting with our panelists using the Slido app. So if everyone can jump onto slido.com and hop into there now. To get into Slido, you need to enter the Google Slido in your browser and open it up. Once you're in the Slido, please type the code #exclusionfencing into the blue box. Let us know in the chat if you're having any issues accessing Slido, and Camilla will walk you through that as well. There are also some links that Camilla has just put in the chat here. We are using Slido to understand who we have in the room and collect questions for our panelists. If you have questions throughout your presentation, please feel free to put them in the Slido Q&A session. If you can't get in for some reason, like I said before, just pop a message in the chat box and Camilla will be there to help you. I'll just run through some quick practice questions now and make sure that everyone can access the Slido app, and then that'll give us an idea of who is joining us this evening. So just going into the first Slido question now. So the first poll question is, have you used Slido before? You should be seeing those results change live on the screen. So we've got some good results coming in. We've got 86% of people who have used Slido before, dropping down now. Very good. Looks like we've got about 64% who have used Slido before. So there's quite a few experienced Slido people in the room. Our next question, what is your closest town? Quite a range of towns coming through there this evening. We've got a few responses from Hay and Burke, and we've got people from a range of places ranging from Kempsey, Trangie, Orange, Condobolin. Mildura seems to be quite a popular response. Thank you everyone for your responses. I will now move on to the next poll question. What type of ag industry are you involved in? If you're involved in a multiple range of industries, pick the one that most applies to your current situation. Lots of different responses coming through. Looks like sheep is our main industry this evening. Now tying with mixed farming, and mixed livestock is also popular. Thank you everyone for your responses. So we have 33% sheep farmers, 33% in mixed farming, and 17% in mixed livestock. A good range of people joining us this evening. The next question is general in nature. What social media platforms do you use most? If you're a social media user, that is. Facebook is a clear winner there. We've got a large majority, up to 80%. Now it's down to 64% people using Facebook. Thank you, everyone. We have Facebook as the most popular social media platform being used by the audience. Our next poll question is, what is your current occupation? As with the industry before, just pick the one that applies to you the most. We've got a pretty good spread of people joining us this evening. Looks like there's just under half farmers, 27% ag industry representatives, a few from government and a few from other. Thank you everyone for answering that question. This is the next question we have related to our topic this evening. Do you have an exclusion fence on your property? We mean a total exclusion fence, or do you have a total grazing pressure fence, or not yet? Quite popular option being not yet. I'm considering putting a fence in, so that's a great platform for you to learn something this evening from other people's experiences about where to get started for putting up an exclusion fence. Thank you everyone for your responses. This evening, we are going to hear from our speakers and then have a Q&A at the end. Any questions that we can't get to this evening, we will endeavour to get back to you over the coming weeks along with the webinar recording. If you have any other comments, we will also have someone moderating the chat if you have any technical difficulties. Today's event will be recorded and will be made available online in the next week or so to revisit or share with colleagues as you see fit. A link to this will be emailed out to you, so once it is available and promoted through our normal communication channels and social media. Okay, up first this evening, I'll be playing a short case study video featuring David Rees from Bellevue, a station south of Ivanhoe in New South Wales. We're also lucky enough to have David along with us this evening to answer any questions that you may have for him at the end of the webinar. I will start that video now.
Yeah, David Rees from Ivanhoe. Our farm's 40 kilometres south of Ivanhoe towards Balranald. We're at 16,000 hectares. We decided to do an exclusion fence to try and keep the wild dogs out which are getting closer, any ferals, mainly to stop the roo population from when you get plague proportions. A few roos aren't a problem. Trying to slow that down so we can spell paddocks in between. Our boundary is 46 kilometres of fence. We've got 37 already done, 9 to go. We've only sort of been done for 2 months. And we're working in with a neighbour next door he's doing his boundary, so it'll be a small cluster to try and I've cut out 19 kilometres of my boundary, so it works out pretty good. One of the main things we're looking at is, pick our lambing percentage up, maybe 5%. It gives us sort of an extra 400 lambs, which is worth, just maybe around that $70,000 a year to pay it off. where we went through the Rural Assistance Authority on a loan over 20 years at 2.5%. And the whole project comes back as a per acre at roughly around $10 an acre, the cost, which is pretty good. We've done it all ourselves so far, mainly because it's probably $160,000 to $200,000 to get a contractor in. And we've probably done it in the same amount of time. Yeah, the fence we've used, we got a lot of quotes, but we come up with Waratah. They come up with a specification of 15150 15 wire with a 300mm apron with a blue latch post which is 2400 long. So we put them in the ground about 670mm into the ground, and a wire on top. Instead of using the barbed wire, we'll use wire. I think if a kangaroo gets caught in it, he's going to get out and not wreck the fence. So total fence height, we're coming up to around 1760mm, and all our end assemblies are drill rod, and they're concreted in at around 1400 in the ground. The longest strain's about 9.5 kilometres, using easy wire fences that strains as you go. Once you tie off and you go right through to the other strainer and tie off that end, it's finished. You got a couple of blokes clipping it in, and it works really good. We got a ute, an old ute we made a frame up for driving the posts. To get our measurement, which were 8 metre spacings, we used a 14-inch rim and tyre and just put that on the front of the old ute. So every 4 rounds of that is 8 metres. Bit technical with someone driving, but it worked all right. And everything was driven with the Marchant air driver, which worked really well. No issues in driving into any hard clay, ground, clay pans. Yeah, they drove him really well. We can spell a paddock once it's all closed off, whereas before you spell a paddock and you get more kangaroos than what sheep were in there. So it gives us opportunity to actually spell more country and move the stock around freely. We can bait that heavily, whereas a fox he'll pick the bait up before he tries to come in, which will save a lot of lambs in the future. And the goats, it's not a thing we farm, but it's a potential that we can keep goats in now and keep the young ones and breed them up and get a bit more cash flow. I think the maintenance is probably going to be a lot easier because the fence is going to be clean, no bushes in it. Something breaks, we can get to it, you can see it and get it done. If we just keep it weed free and bush, no trees, potentially I think it'll look after itself pretty well, and just mainly look after the apron. We're going to have a bit of country with a bit of cane grass country that floods. It might be an issue in another 5 or 10 years, I don't know. That might not have to worry about it, we'll just see how it goes. I think once I see the process of what we've done and how the feed holds up, probably a lot better inside, I think there's going to be a lot of people start to do it. If there's a boundary fence that's no good, why not put one of these up? It might be only an extra couple of $1,000 a K, which is nothing for what you're going to get back out of it. The future of it I think is pretty good. And I think the biggest thing is the posts. Don't go and put a smaller post in, put the bigger ones in, do it right the first time, you won't have to touch it again. It was pretty daunting to think, that we had 46 Ks to do. Two of us were putting in 5 kilometres of posts a day with no effort. And putting the netting up, we were starting at 7 o'clock in the morning and finished by 2, doing 6.5 Ks. We would have done more, but we had to come back and get more materials. So the potential to do 8 or 9 Ks a day with 4 blokes would be pretty easy, I think. So it's not that daunting really, it's just getting the setup right and away you go. It seemed to work pretty good. Look, once we had it set up, you know, the odd day you'd come home and change something, but now it seems to be, yeah, everything works pretty smoothly, really good.
We're here today at Riverside Station at Bulldigal. The total size of the property is about 60,000 hectares. The fences that we're putting up now should see my sons out and be here for my grandchildren. We undertook this fencing program for several reasons. The main one was the influx of wild dogs. We've got a wild pig problem which we can control with the exclusion fencing, and we tried to do rotational grazing, and we were finding that total grazing pressure was an issue with the wildlife moving into paddocks that we destocked. So far we've got about 50 or 60 kilometres of exclusion fence in. By the middle of next year we should have about 150. The main benefits so far have been controlling pigs, and enables us to do a rotational grazing which already is showing benefits in better biodiversity of the plant species.
We're anticipating that our stocking rates are going to go up by about 10%, and I think that's pretty conservative looking at the way the exclusion has been working in other areas. We believe that in the next, like in 25 to 30 years' time, the fence is still going to be there the way we're designing it and the way we're building it. It's going to give us the real benefit, especially running into dry times. It might buy us a month, but that might be the month that we need until we get the next rain. Once you start sitting down there and really crunching the numbers, it all just adds up. It is a big cost and outlay to get it done, but the benefits are well and truly there in the long run. It's costing us $17 a hectare to put it in, and we're budgeting on $50 a hectare out the other side. That's work and time, but it's going to pay off very quickly.
When we normally have fences that are inundated with floodwater, after 2 floods they are in pretty poor condition, and after the 3rd one you'll need to replace wires that have been rusted out. We've got some of this blue wire that's been through 2 floods now, and it's just into the 3rd, and there doesn't seem to be any deterioration so far. So obviously the maintenance on our fences in the flood country is going to be considerably less.
I suppose that if you look back with the previous generations, there's always been something big that's been done, and that this is the big part that we're doing that's hopefully going to be the legacy going forwards, that we're setting up Tom's Lake and Riverside and Torrigani now for the next generation to be able to manage these issues going forwards.
I will now introduce our main speaker for this evening, Morgan Gronold. Morgan is the Senior Regional Development Manager with RAPID, which is a unified local government organisation which aims to assist and facilitate the growth and development of the Central West and wider Outback region in Queensland. By working together, members of local governments are united in their desire to enhance the quality of life for all residents. Morgan works on projects in the Central West for the Central West. They aim to stabilise regional depopulation, grow jobs, and drive economy, diversity and growth. His major project is the Queensland Feral Pest Initiative Project for Central West Queensland, better known as the Fence That's Saving the Outback. Previous to this role, he spent over 15 years in the region with the Queensland Government Department of Primary Industries, focused on the international marketing and export of meat and agricultural products, which saw him spend time in Latin America, the USA and China. Thank you, Morgan. I'll now hand over to you to share your screen.
Thanks very much, Tanisha. G'day, everyone. Just give me a minute and we'll make sure the technology is working. Okay, hopefully everyone can see the Fence That's Saving the Outback webinar title screen. Excellent. Tanisha's nodding, so I'll take that as a yes. First of all, thank you very much to Tanisha and everyone from the Farm Business Resilience Program in New South Wales for the call. Look, you know, more than happy to share our experience up here in central Western Queensland. If we can assist anyone, you know, from the other states or anywhere really, to show them what we've developed and what we've learned, you know, that's certainly fine with us. So yeah, what I'll do is I'll just jump into this. So as Tanisha indicated, I work for the Remote Area Planning and Development Board, or the RAPID board. So you can see there, obviously, we take up nearly just over 20% of the state. So there's 7 local government areas here in central Western Queensland. We're what they call a regional organisation of council. So a local government area is a shire council region. And it's about 10,500 people. So in many respects, you know, it's quite similar to, you know, central and Western New South Wales. The places that came up earlier on slide are around, you know, Burke and Wilcannia and that sort of stuff, sort of very similar. So if you're thinking about central Western Queensland and you've never been up here, think of places like Barcaldine, where I'm based, you know, Longreach, Winton, you know, Aramac, you know, the old Jack Thompson movie, Sunday Too Far Away, you know, that sort of stuff. So that's largely the area that we're talking about. So if I look at, and I suppose just give you a bit of background in regards to why this project happened for us, or the challenge. So as indicated, the central western part of Queensland was in many respects built on the sheep's back. However, since the 1990s, we've seen a significant drop, 75% plus drop in sheep numbers, from 2 million plus back to about 450,000. And as well as this, we've seen lambing rates falling from sort of 70+%, which is sort of an average up here, back to around 15%. And so obviously what happens then is that we get significant economic, environmental and social impacts happening to us across the region. Now, I should also say that in regards to these dropping in sheep numbers, so all of the usual control measures, you know, that landholders use, you know, baiting, you know, et cetera, are all still in place. So these are all, you know, we're all doing what we usually always did. And yet the issue that we were having is we were seeing, you know, these such large and significant sheep numbers go from the region. Equally for us, the challenge that you have, obviously, when your economy is built on the sheep's back, is that as the sheep go, obviously the population goes as well. And so this is not an unusual problem for, you know, regional communities in Queensland, New South Wales, across the world, as that we see people, you know, leaving. So for us, the challenge on top of this is that we've had a 14% average population loss on the 2011 to 15 census from across the region. That's at least 700 ag jobs that are lost. And, you know, because every one of those ag jobs, you know, traditionally has, you know, a wife or a partner and a couple of kids. And so you can see that that 10,500 people that we talked about before isn't a large number of people to begin with. And when you put such significant population loss in against it. Now, equally too, you know, we've probably had the 8 or 10 toughest years that we've seen here. And obviously that's contributed as well. However, you know, generally what's happened is the impact of wild dogs and the challenge up here has seriously accelerated that depopulation and the loss here. So the key point for us, as Tanisha indicated earlier, is this for us is about you know, certainly more than just a fence. So when we talk about the sort of impact that we're having, and so what's in italics here has come from specifically from, you know, landholders here. And I should say, I suppose, the reason that I focus on population loss is that RAPID, we're not a local natural resource group. We're a group of councils. So we're councils that are looking directly at the populations of our community. So in some respect, it's quite sort of strange that a council group is looking at something like this as what would potentially be considered as a natural resource type project, whereas for us it's really about economic development and reform and trying to restart the growth here. So I suppose I just put you in that space from there. So again, so we've gone from that overall regional view back to what's happening in, you know, people's backyards. And so here's some examples of what people are telling me. So, you know, in the past 3 to 4 years, just in our immediate area, you know, we've trapped and shot, you know, 750 to 800 dogs and the dogs are still coming. After we lost 200 ewes in one paddock in a couple of weeks, we made the decision that we weren't bringing sheep home until we were fenced. So when we talk about the significant impact or the extreme impact that wild dogs are having on our traditional industries here, our small stock industries, that's a couple of examples. Similarly, when we talk about, obviously there's not just a impact on livestock, but the impact on investment and your overall production, which is what Tanisha talked about at the beginning. We've got people saying, and again, this is directly from the landholders that are involved with us, 100% scan ewes, a return of 55% lamb. So in 2016, we just got out. It was just too great. In the last 12 months, wild dogs have cost our customer, 1.4 million. Lambing percentage has gone from 80 to 30, and that, you can see there we've lost, 11,000+ lambs, fleeces, lambs born, sort of, et cetera, et cetera. So again, when this is your number one economy, and we're seeing people, lose or go from the region because of the impact, obviously what goes with them then is cash flow, and that then flows into, empty shop fronts, you can't fill football teams, et cetera, all the stuff that we talk about. So the solution, and so in about 2014, a group of landholders and council mayors got together and started to look at, what can be done to, what is some sort of solution? We can't make it rain, but what can we do to try and backstop this problem and draw a bit of a line in the sand and give people the opportunity to get back into small stock and bring up the predominantly labour and employment that goes around it. I mean, even though it is 2021 and we've all got, a smartphone and whatever, sheep still need, 7 or 8 people sort of heads down, bums up, doing it. So from a community perspective and from an employment perspective, small stock still have woolly sheep, but all small stocks still have a significant contribution. So out of that came the cluster fencing model, and it was developed in the region for the region. I should say that this model has also been introduced into Western Australia, and we've also been asked to contribute and work on the development of the barrier fences both in South Australia and Victoria, and also the most recent one, I think, that's on the New South Wales-Queensland border. So it's been great to be able to share the information that we've learned here and give it to other landholders and other people in other states. So, and again, realistically, this for us is not just a natural resource project, because the long-term goal is the catalyst for growing jobs and increasing rural profitability. For us, that's what it's all about. And it's quite unique in the sense that we have quite a clear governance and partnerships model. So this is funding that's come from the state and federal government. The state and federal government make a contribution and the landholder pays the bulk of that. And then there's legal entities and legal enforceable contracts that tie all that governance and partnership together, which if anyone wants a copy of any of that stuff, we'll happily share it with whomever. So the solution in regards to this cluster part of it is that when we talk about a cluster up here or in our QFPI model, you need a minimum of 2 people. So it can't go to just one individual landholder. So it's a minimum of 2 people, and they must enclose an area. So it can't be a straight line fence. It's got to be a fence that starts at one point and goes around and encloses an area. As David indicated before, it's very similar to what he's done there. So the minimum mesh height is 1.5 metres, and it needs at least a 250 mil apron on the bottom. And that's a fairly, as he indicated before, it's a very accessible product now. 8 or 10 years ago, it sort of didn't exist, but now any of the major providers across Australia really can provide you with that sort of product. So in regards to the government contribution, and just in regards to costs up here at the moment, when we first started this fencing, it was probably somewhere in the vicinity of sort of $5,000 to $6,000 a kilometre. We're probably touching 10 to 12 at the moment. We all know, steel and wire prices have gone up significantly in the last couple of years, and they certainly have here as well. So the way that the program works here in regards to the QFPI model is that the government provides a subsidy for those clusters. So generally what happens is we we have to compete with other, when we first started, it was just us because we sort of started the model here, and then other parts of Queensland sort of got on the bandwagon, which is not necessarily a bad thing. And then we compete against other local government areas for funding from the state and the feds. We get that funding, and that's used as a $2,700 per kilometre subsidy for that fence erection. So it's not a loan, it's a subsidy. Now, obviously, as we indicated before, with the cost of fencing up here about $10,000 to $12,000 a kilometre, it's about 25%, you know, sort of 20 to 30% of the overall cost. So the government really likes the model because, you know, generally speaking, they're asked for at least 50%, but usually 100% of the cost, whereas here they're only putting in about 25% of the cost. And the landholder is putting in the remaining funds. So the government quite likes the model. And what it's tried to do is, and pardon the pun, is get people off the fence and give them a contribution or a catalyst for them to start fencing. And I'll talk in a bit more detail about that in a minute. Look, very similar to what David indicated, the key point here, what landholders tell me, and so I developed the program for the Central West from the beginning, is that it's delivering control, confidence and investment. So once the fences go up, immediately people feel like they've got control again. Control of their finances, as we indicated before, around the cost that wild dogs were having on their flocks and their overall bottom line. Control of their place. So obviously, as David indicated, if you've got 40,000 acres or so up here, which is probably an average sort of size block, and you've got dogs that are in, you know, your top corner or your top whatever, you're not putting stock up there, you're not going up there, you're probably not going, you know, you're not checking weeds and that sort of stuff as much. And so you're potentially pushing the remainder, you know, there might be, let's say 10,000 acres that you can't use. So you're pushing the rest of your place a bit harder than you probably should and things like that. So they immediately get control of the environment. And the other point too, we should make note of here is also people are getting back control of their mental and social well-being. So obviously one of the big issues up here is that the fractures start in the community around the fact that, you know, as David or anyone knows that, you know, chases dogs, it's a bit of a black hole. So if you're the, you know, if you're the secretary of the cricket club and you know, you've got a meeting tonight at 7 and you see a dog in the afternoon, well, you just drop everything and chase the dog, which means you mightn't get to the cricket meeting, which means the cricket meeting might get pushed off, which means the cricket club might inform. And this is where what we've seen in the monitoring and evaluation that we've done is that these ripple effects or these cracks start in your social cohesion in your communities. And a lot of it can be brought back to this one issue. So it's about delivering control. And then obviously, like any humans, once you get control, you get confidence and you want to be here. And then that leads to additional investment. So generally what we've found is that those people that have fenced all of a sudden start saying, well, we are going to be here for the long term, and that will lead to extra investment. So all of a sudden they're doing up the sharing quarters, all of a sudden they're laying polypipe, all of a sudden this cash flow spin-off comes because they feel like they've got more control and confidence. The other thing, obviously, it does by physically having a physical barrier across the region is it provides significant biosecurity advantages to those people, whether that's for something as simple as lice, right the way through to if there's, you know, some major disease outbreak or something like that. So the solution, so again, this comes from producers that are here in the region, like the ones that we talked to earlier. This is the sort of after story, I suppose. So, you know, a producer said, you know, we've shown 22,000 sheep this financial year in Longreach. If we didn't have the fence, you know, we wouldn't have the sheep, we wouldn't have the wages going into town. You know, in the last 5 years, yeah, you can read it there. It was, you know, less than 40, now it's 80%. You know, last year they got 26, this year they got 1. So that's the sort of impact that it's having for them. I suppose to give you an idea of the scale of what we've done here, and I thoroughly recommend if you want to go onto that, not just a fence site, the fence that's saving the outback. So that's something that We Rapid has developed up here, partly because we were frustrated that the message that, or the benefits that we were getting from cluster fencing that was occurring in the region or on with landholders wasn't getting the cut through with government and people in other areas, because, you know, I'd write a 100-page report and people would get to page 2 and, you know, obviously either fall asleep or do whatever. So we needed a solution that would provide the same level of information in an interactive way. And so if people, and there's more links to it later on, that it tells the story, not just the data story as in the numbers and the people, but also we've got interviews there from landholders themselves and people in town about the impacts that it's had from them. So we've done 4 rounds of fencing up here. We're currently just in the 4th one. We're just getting people signed up at the moment. we've done 41 clusters, so those incorporated bodies or groups of people, 168 properties, a bit over 4,000 k's of fencing for a fraction over 2 million hectares done. Now the sheep numbers, so part of the application process is we ask landholders to sit down and tell us, what their before and afters likely going to be. Now, obviously that's, all things being equal, but the information that comes from landowners themselves say that sheep numbers will, all things being equal, grow from, 240 to sort of over 700,000, which is exactly what, from a long-term catalyst employment perspective, we in the region want to see. So just, and this is all on that website, but just to give you a bit more information. So the region's fencing area larger than Wales. We've created 140 permanent jobs in ag, plus the flow on from that. Increased regional income by, as it says, 28 million there every year, and have used that $11 million of government funding to create, that. And as it says, that's with landholders chipping in, a whopping 30 million. So again, it's a model that the government quite likes because they're the minor player, and they say, landholders have, skin in the game, in that regard, because it's coming from their pockets. I should also say that all of our data isn't done by me. We use an independent accounting firm in Brisbane called Hall Chadwick that are independent economists and auditors that do all this stuff to maintain that level of independence. Again, if we talk about return on government money, which is what they're keen to see and whatnot, and as you can read it there, but basically, as if you give us, as in this program, $1, we'll use that to increase regional income by $2.83 every year, going into the future. And again, we're quite proud of that. There's not many projects that can do that in anywhere, but certainly in regional areas. And then, as we say, for every $85,000 of one-off funding, we'll create a permanent job. And that's for us all about bringing your family back, putting more kids in the school, filling the footy team up and doing those things. Again, this is just an example that a landholder sent to me a month or so ago. So this shed was built, this is 20 minutes out of Barkey. This shed was built in 2008, brand new shed. In 2010, this group, or this family conglomerate, was completely out of sheep. The dogs just eating them to bits. So they had, and basically it had cattle in it for the last 10 years. They started fencing in 17. They were one of the early ones that came with us. And what you're seeing there is one of their, exactly what we want to see. So you're seeing woolly sheep, plenty of them in good, in good nick, and people in sheds and working. So that for us is exactly, the outcome that we in the community and the government is keen to see up here. For those of you that want to learn more about what we're doing up here, the ABC Landline did a program a couple of years ago now, specifically on what we were doing. So if you just Google that or go to the ABC webpage or whatever, that stuff will be there. Equally, as I indicated before, just put into Google, not just fence, or just put it in there and you'll see it breaks it down both with, it's quite an interactive, they call it a scrolly telling interactive website. So it'll give you the challenges and the data and the solution and interviews and all that sort of stuff of what's happening from the landholders and people involved themselves. And then that's me. So, and I'm happy to take calls or emails or whatever. And equally, happily through Tanisha and the group there, if anyone, once the borders open again in a couple of weeks into Queensland, if anyone wants to come up, you're more than welcome. We've hosted people from, every state and everything else here. So you're certainly welcome to come up and be involved. So I've probably gone over time, Tanisha, because as you see, I don't sort of mind a chat, but so I'll stop sharing my screen. And yeah, so that's, happy to take any questions in the Q&A session later on.
Excellent. Thank you, Morgan. That was a really good overview of the Queensland experience and what's happening up there with the cluster fencing model. It's great to see we've had quite a few questions coming through already. So I'll just quickly go through our next case study, which is another New South Wales producer who has built an exclusion fence. If anyone has any more questions for either David or Morgan, please chuck them in the Slido Q&A and we'll get to those shortly. So we will now hear about a case study from Urambi Station at Gilgunya in Western New South Wales. We have another David here tonight presenting his exclusion fence, and he's kindly provided us with an insight into his operation and the reasons for choosing to build his fence. I'll be walking us through some slides and pictures from David from his experience. So David has had a great experience through building his exclusion fence. He's quoted that he should have built it 25 years ago. His advice to everyone out there that is considering building an exclusion fence is to build the first kilometre and you'll be addicted. Be interesting to see whether the David we have online tonight shares that opinion. David manages 11,000 hectares on Urambi Station with cattle, dorpers and managed goats. He is part of the 160,000 hectare Gilgunya cluster, which is involving 22 properties. He has also taken an additional step after seeing great value in having the exclusion fence, with 80% of his own property now enclosed within the cluster. So he saw this as an opportunity to upgrade his already existing boundary fence, which required maintenance. David has seen immediate benefits from his exclusion fence, such as increased ground cover, an increase in invaluable pasture, livestock health benefits, reduced bare ground on his property, and several other benefits. He's seen a return on investment in an estimated of 18 to 24 months. He's been able to change his grazing management practices from set stocking to rotational grazing, and also reduced his need for supplementing and confinement feeding. His return on investment, as I mentioned before, will be achieved through increasing his stocking rate once he's allowed time for his pastures to recover after the fence has been built. Thank you, David, for providing this little insight into your operation, and we welcome any questions that come through for this evening's Q&A session. So for the Q&As, please take the time once we're working through the Q&A session to go through and do the post-webinar survey in Slido as well. This is an excellent way for you to provide feedback on tonight's webinar, as well as guide future events. I'll just stop sharing my screen while we go through the Q&A session. Thank you, Morgan and David, for your time this evening. I've had quite a few comments and questions come through, so we might make a start. The first question that I have here is for you, Morgan. Do you know of anyone who has regretted putting in an exclusion fence?
No, look, to take the words out of the second David's mouth, that's exactly what everyone says to me. We should have done it years ago. We just do it. And equally to what he's saying there, most of the individuals will then split themselves up, because obviously the more check fences you've got, the more control and confidence you get.
Great, thank you, Morgan. The next one, we'll get an opinion from both of you. We might start with David. How much maintenance is required for an exclusion fence?
As in, like before or after it's put up?
Probably both, David. So was there a bit of maintenance to start, and then what will the ongoing maintenance be for you?
Yeah, just the maintenance to get it right, because we've come in 7 metres off our boundary fence. We've had to probably graded a good 20 metres out off the boundary, cleaned it up and levelled it out. That's access. We've actually sprayed, we've had it in probably 3 months now. We've actually sprayed twice, so it gives us access to spray and keep it clean.
Sorry, not sure what happened there. From our perspective, I concur with David. You can't build these. You can't build this fence and just go to Noosa, for the weekend. Like it's not made of some supernatural material. Of course, it needs a level of maintenance, but as David's indicated, every fence needs a level of maintenance. So what people have found is it's no more or less than anything else. And equally, as he just said, all the fences are brand new. I haven't seen this many brand new fences here well, there probably hasn't been in 50 years, let alone all at the same time. So for once you're dealing with brand new materials, you can keep an eye on things. You've just done the grading. You've made these, great accesses next to them, etc. So of course there's a level of maintenance, but, to be expected.
Great, thank you, Morgan and David. How long after installing an exclusion
Probably
fence
a bit like a new car. You look after it and keep it clean.
Very true. Very true. Sorry, then if you want to go first.
Yeah, look, I can go first. Look, the landholders tell me immediately. First of all, because from a simply a pressure perspective, so that they feel all of a sudden that they feel better. One, they've got it because they've got a brand new fence, but also because you have a physical structure that's stopping dogs coming in and getting sheep. So the classic example for me is when landholders tell me that traditionally, you know, many wives tell me they've now got calmer sheep and calmer husbands, which I'm assuming is a good thing. But also what they're saying is that they'll see sheep and lambs or any small stock actually grazing right up to the edge of fences. A fence that traditionally they've been huddled in paddocks or away from things, they're actually spreading out across the place and going right up to the edges. I'd imagine David has a similar type experience.
Some of the benefits you're seeing with your fence, if you're seeing any already, it's quite new.
Yeah, that's pretty right. Like I had an example this morning was, the good example this morning was mustering. There was 35 to 40 grooves on the outside of the fence, nothing on the inside. If that fence wasn't there could have been a couple of hundred in there, who knows? Because there were two paddocks beside it that was being spelled for a couple of months. So that was a really good example to, starting to get that benefit straight away.
While we're talking about seeing some benefits, someone has asked, how long should I wait after constructing the exclusion fence to increase my stocking rate?
That's a difficult one because they say you probably shouldn't have to really be increasing your stocking rate. Keep it the same, spread your sheep out, and maybe you're not going to feed in a drought. You're going to feed when you go into a drought. Just keep rotating around on that.
Another question for you, David, while we're going through, who should I contact for advice on materials?
I went through, it was in Griffith, for the materials. I contacted through Waratah. They've been really good on pricing. I choose Waratah mainly it was an Australian product, and that's all we've ever used here. And so done the job. They actually come up with the prototype of what fence to put in as far as price and the distance of posts and all the materials. Sort of ask around really.
Just to add to David's comments, the AWI have got a exclusion fence booklet now, so that's something that people can have a look at. Certainly, whether it's through us or like all of the major providers have their own YouTube channels now and that sort of stuff on what's been done and that sort of thing. So you can do a fair bit of R&D from sort of the comfort of your home. I'd also just say there's plenty of competitive tension in the market, certainly in Queensland. So they should be quite price competitive. So we've had products using everyone from Waratah to Great Southerns. I mean, we've got people transporting steel and wire out of Perth, where Great Southerns from, into Queensland because it's cost competitive compared to stuff that's made on the East Coast. So obviously go with what works in your area, but feel free to there's nothing like, it's always good to have a bit of competitive tension price wise.
Great, thanks Morgan. And I see that we've just had that AWI resource put in the chat there. So if you guys would like to jump on and download that one to have a look at as well. So thank you for mentioning that one. Another question for you, Morgan. How much has the cost of exclusion fencing increased since you started working in this space?
Look, I'd say it's probably doubled. So as I said, when we started in about 2015, it was probably $5,000 or $6,000 a kilometre. And as I'm sure David would indicate, materials like wire is just about that now. So it completely depends on your country. If you've got nice big flat country, you might average 10 to 11,000 kilometres, $10 to $11,000 a kilometre. As soon as you put a few, creek crossings, channels or whatever, more steel goes in, your cost goes up. So it's expensive, but coming back to your earlier point, Nisha, even still, like we've done 4 rounds of exclusion fencing funding here and it's still oversubscribed. And it's not, there's plenty of people doing it that aren't in my scheme that are just doing it privately like David's done. Interest rates are good. Q-Rider, which I'm sure there's a New South Wales equivalent up here, has got, low interest loans. There's a lot of information on exclusion fencing now. And even with the price being so expensive or equivalent expensive between, here in central New South Wales, I imagine, no one's saying don't do it. They're all saying we should have just start.
That's great. Thank you. Do you find, Morgan, that most farmers change their management post-fence installation?
Oh, look, I wouldn't say they change it. They probably just go back to how they'd like to do it. So again, what most of the feedback we get when people have got any pests, but especially dogs, is they just can't run the place how they'd like to run it. Because exactly what David said, So I think what it's enabled people to do is actually start running the place how they want to run it and how they've always wanted to run it, or were able to do it before dogs, came and put pressure on them. So.
Do you have any comments there, David? Will you be making any management changes following the fence construction?
Yeah, I think it gives us a lot better chance to rotate sheep around. You could never do it before because the roos move straight in. As soon as you spell the paddock, the roos come in the same number as the sheep you took out. So now, we can actually spell that paddock for 6 months if we want to, and nothing's going to do any damage.
While we're talking a little bit about construction and maintenance, we've had a question come through about the recommended height of exclusion fences. So is 1.5 a recommended height, or is higher better? What are you guys finding there?
Look, for us, so that's a mandatory requirement that the state and federal government have put on us. So all our fences have to be a minimum 1.5 mesh high. Equally, though, there's plenty. Talk to any of the suppliers. David knows. It starts at $9.50 and goes up. One thing that we're seeing, and obviously goes up in price the more mesh you put in, or the higher the meshes as well. What we've tended to find here is that people are putting a 1,500 high on the outside, and then as they split themselves up or split their own paddocks up, they might come back to 950 or 1250 or sort of whatever it is. But certainly for us, 1,500 is the minimum mesh height.
Do you have any comments on height, David? Why did you choose the height you've chosen?
I think it's mainly the post selection, and that was sort of a recommendation. It comes back at about 1760 with the top wire on it, which is a pretty good height. You're probably going to get the odd roo go over, but you're not getting hundreds of them. So I think the apron's probably the main thing of the whole fence, like 300 mil apron, and have that sitting there and keep it clean. I think that's a bonus of the whole setup.
Thank you, David. A question for you, Morgan. What environmental impact studies were needed with regards to kangaroo and emu movements and impacts on neighbours from those movement restrictions?
Sure. So all of the fencing that's done under my program or the QFQI program in Queensland is managed by the Queensland Department of Ag and Fisheries. Sorry, it changes its name a little bit. And when the applications go in and we supply them with where it's going to fence, all of that information, A, is public, and B, goes through the Queensland Environmental Protection Agency. So they can come back to us and talk about the fact of what threatened species and that sort of stuff are in the region that people need to be aware of as well. So that's the requirement. One of the requirements we have in regards to environmental impacts. In regards to specifically macropod movements and that sort of stuff, again, that's handled. We deliver the project. The background and how that all works is handled by the Department of Ag and Fisheries in Queensland.
Great, thank you, Morgan. And I assume that would be quite similar with the impacts on overall biodiversity inside versus outside the fence?
Again, so the biodiversity is handled by the Environmental Protection Agency in that regard. So when we submit where's going to be fenced and it's made public and that sort of stuff, they, as a government agency, have the option to put in additional requirements into that area. So, and what we've also found from that is that we've got, once that information goes to the government and goes public, we have both government and non-government, so universities and that sort of stuff, approach us. And largely that's been about them wanting to put threatened species into clusters because they know they're going in sort of back behind wire, if that sort of makes sense. So generally speaking, in regards to threatened species, it tends to be that we'll have organisations or universities or departments contact us, and then we they then contact the landholders and try and get those threatened species back in behind wire of the clusters.
That's great. That's just answered another one of the questions that came through about reintroducing endangered native species behind the wire. So that's a great initiative there. There's quite a few questions coming through in regards to government funding. We will look to send some of that out after this webinar. We're not looking to address those questions here this evening, but we will make sure that attendees this evening do receive that information that they're looking for. A question for you, Morgan, on the Queensland experience. Is there anything being done to control wild dogs outside of exclusion fencing?
Well, obviously, all landholders do their best to control wild dogs. So in Queensland, there's councils still bait, people do private baiting, you can get injectors and all that sort of stuff in there. So again, coming back to your point right at the beginning, Tanisha, fences are just another tool in the toolbox. And I'm a bit young and whatever, but I mean, fences aren't particularly new. Fences, we were doing similar styles to this, back in the 20s and 30s. Then for whatever reason, whether it be 1080 or other things, we probably just forgot a bit about what it is. So again, the fencing as a tool in any land, in managing any part of the landholder's place is not a particularly new tool. It just looks a bit different, or it sort of looks like it used to look, I suppose. So yeah, look, again, you can't just fence and expect that, the world's going to change overnight. It's just another tool in your toolbox. Of course, you've got to still, manage pests as best you can, which I'm sure everyone wants to do.
While I've just mentioned the funding there before, David, would you like to just really quickly talk through, you mentioned in your video, the Rural Assistance Authority funding. Just quickly mention to the audience what that is.
True, it was the Rural Assistance Authority with the, I think they call it Farm Innovation Fund. Probably not much they do not need to know about you. Unfortunately, you've got to put there's a lot of work goes into it. Probably took us 2 months to get all the paperwork together, and but yeah, it was good once we got to the stage with the materials and that, to be able to put all that towards them. It was pretty quick. So and it was a 20-year loan, 2.5%. So you can pay it back in the first couple of years if you want to, and only. Yeah, there's really no holding back on it. It's pretty good.
Excellent. Thank you, David, for sharing your experience. So that is definitely an option for New South Wales producers. The information has just been put into the chat box. I'll quickly get one more question answered and then I'll wrap up this evening's webinar. One final question that's come through is, will it control wild pigs?
Definitely. Yeah. That'll control anything you want.
I'd concur with those comments. So one of the, and again, it's not going to control every wild pig or every pest animal, but it's going to control most of them, or a high significant proportion. A great example is, I was looking at a fence, one of my fences recently, which is in Winton, which is, again, the sort of, central western area. And he had always assumed that most of his lamb losses were from dogs. And he said they hadn't even completed the exclusion fence, and it was actually pigs. They'd go up of an evening and there was just, not quite hundreds, but significant portions of pigs trying to get through this exclusion fence to get to lambing ewes. So he said his lambing percentage literally went up in the first lambing simply because he was able to keep pigs out of lambing ewes.
That's great. Just a reminder for everyone, please complete this evening's post-webinar survey. So that's also in your Slido app. It's really great if you can complete that for us. So that helps us to gauge how we went tonight, what your thoughts are, and what you'd like to hear more about. While I've still got everyone online and you're completing that post-webinar survey, we're talking about pest control. Someone has just put in one last-minute rush comment: can't foxes dig underneath? Look,
again, fences need maintenance. So, if you get country up here that's got a bit of a sandy base and that sort of stuff through it, or you get a water run through a fence, and obviously they'll dig a hole out of under it. I mean, foxes, dogs, pigs, they're a lot smarter than we think. generally speaking, what you'll find, well, we've found is that, and we've had a bit of rain up here just lately, if you get a rush of water under a fence, you'll immediately see tracks there because, you know, the pests are looking for holes. So it comes, for my mind, of course, like anything can dig under anything if it wants to, bad enough. And again, it comes back to maintenance. And also, as David indicated, that apron length. So what we're seeing many people do, you know, where there's a water course or there's something that they feel will dig under the fence if it's a bit sandy, is that you just put extra apron on. So in that particular section, your apron might be 600, you know, because you just run an extra lap of it or whatever. But anyway, that's the experience we found. Don't expect that the pests are going to respect the fact that you've put a fence up. Obviously, they still want to get through to, you know, whether it be, you know, kids, as in goat kids, not other kids, or you know, sheep, lambing ewes or whatever.
Great, thank you very much, Morgan. I think the key we've learnt from yourself and David this evening is definitely maintenance and get in and have a go if you're interested in building the fence. I want to say a really big thank you to both Morgan and David for their time this evening and for sharing their experiences with us. We're grateful for your time today, and we hope today has met your expectations. So that's a big thank you to everyone who's taken the time to join us this evening. As has been mentioned and has been mentioned in the chat box, a link to the webinar recording will be emailed out to all attendees in the next week or so. And please remember to complete that post-webinar survey. It's really important for us for gauging what we should bring to you guys in the future and what you would like to hear about. And I'd also like to say a massive thank you to everyone behind the scenes, in particular my colleague Luke Stacey, who's been heavily involved in putting together a lot of the footage and content for this evening. So thank you to the Business Resilience team, and thank you, Luke. Thanks, everybody.